Started. It's always such a delight to see you all here. Welcome to MoMA R&D Salon number 45. Quite unbelievable. And it's been a delight to go for 10 years at full speed and to be able to choose some of the most instinctive and also weirdest topics as we went. And after the last two salons, one about traces, one about team sports, we decided to talk about egg. It kind of came natural, as eggs do, right? And it embodies so much of what we wanted to talk about that we found it an irresistible subject, and I hope you will too. So you're welcome here tonight. Also, those who are watching us on live stream, good to see you all. Right? And egg is really what we all think about when we think of beginning. It's what we think about when we think of nourishment. It's what we think about when we think of perfection. And eggs are not perfect, but they are the closest approximation to perfection that we can think of. I didn't even introduce myself, but I'm Paola Antonelli, and I love eggs. I always did. And in particular, I love this egg that is behind me. This egg that is behind me is the work of Kiki Smith, an artist that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and it's become one of my obsessions. She made it in 1999, life-size, with glass blower. She made an edition of 150. I did not buy it then, not because I was following the MoMA Code of Ethics that tells me that I shouldn't collect art, but because I couldn't afford it. Otherwise, I was so obsessed with it that I would have bought it. I did not buy it, and I'm still obsessed with it to this day. It's the most amazing object. It fits in your hand, and it just captures your imagination, and it mesmerizes you. And Kiki did it because she was really interested in the idea of body and bodily fluids. And of course, the yolk of the egg is what nourishes the embryo, is what is supposed to begin life. It's a block, a tiny building block of nature. And for her, she says that she always thought that the whole history of the world is in your body, and the yolk is where the body comes from. So the idea of the beginning and the idea of something that is a series but at the same time is always unique is also what we see in the natural world. Eggs are just irresistible because they come in so many different shapes, in so many different colors, in so many different variations. And we have great people that will tell us about them tonight. But one of the most interesting bits of information that Christina Michaud, who's my partner in crime, as you know, dug out is that the shells of eggs have all those different markings due to a process that is similar to inkjet printing, she says. So as the egg is rotated by muscles in the wall of the shell gland, blobs of pigment are added like ink to a blank sheet of paper. Go figure. And every single part of the egg, the shell, the white, the yolk, everything is wondrous in its design and its engineering and in the way it actually comes to be. So Alfred Romer, a paleontologist in the United States, said that the egg is the most marvelous single invention in the whole history of vertebrate life. And I would say also invertebrate. I mean, it really is the most wonderful invention. And its aesthetics is something that has obsessed humans for a whole lifetime of history. This is one of the earliest views of eggs. It's from Pompeii, so it's 50 before Christ, more or less. It's one of the earliest depictions, but then, of course, eggs became one of the most enduring symbols, especially in the Renaissance. And you see here, Piero della Francesca, the Madonna di Brera, that has an ostrich egg that is dangling from the ceiling as a symbol of purity also. So not only perfection, but also purity. And the Virgin Mary in Catholicism is often seen with an ostrich egg that is connected to her life and to her being. And of course, many designers have remained obsessed with the egg. You see here the same egg by Piero della Francesca, and Achille Castiglioni, who was my teacher also, and was a great designer, did that particular lamp thinking exactly of that egg. But I have to say that one of the most beautiful lamps that are inspired by the egg and that is also here in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art is the one that you see on the right-hand side by Jordi Canudas, that kind of embodies the tragedy and the beauty of the egg. In order to reveal what's inside and to reveal life, you have to break it, you have to destroy it. So that lamp comes as an egg, and it has a special little mallet that you have to break the egg with in order to reveal the bulb and the light within. So it's quite beautiful and poetic, and it also speaks about the eggshell, sturdy yet breakable, and one of the best packages in the world. This is a 1959 exhibition here at MoMA that I wish I had curated because it was just fabulous, the catalog. It's called The Package, and it was all about packaging, blister packaging. It was all about, natural packaging, whatever you can think of, and the egg was on the cover of the catalog. And indeed, there's very few packages that can be packaging examples that can be so able to both nurture and also protect what's inside. Most eggshells are also breathable, so they also let some of the outside world come in, but filtered. So the perfect package. And indeed, some eggs, especially ostrich eggs, have been used as packages throughout history. Ostrich eggs are very rare because ostrich are pretty aggressive. So if you try to steal their eggs, they become enraged. But they have, throughout history, been used as vessels for liquid by populations all over the world, and even used as markings in deserted parts, to help people trace their way. So they're the ultimate containers, eggs, and they have really strong structural properties that can teach us a lot about how to build. And indeed, architects have been fascinated with eggs for a really long time. Now, you see here on the upper left, one of the projects for a competition for the Centre Pompidou, and it was André Bruyère that had made this proposal that was like an egg. I mean, it couldn't be more literal, but he thought that by building eggs, we would also be able to change people's perception of time, because time would flow as opposed to being captured in the corners of buildings. So quite an amazing conception of it. And then, eggs were also used as decoration. And what you see on the bottom left is instead the Egg of Beirut, a cinema that was begun in the early 1970s and was never finished because the Civil War broke out. And it still is there. It's used for performances, and it has become one of the symbols of the city of Beirut. And of course, leave it to Cedric Price. Those of you that are not in architecture and design might not know him, but he's not only a great architect, but also a great raconteur and storyteller, using some of the best metaphors. And in this case, he uses the egg to explain the evolution of the city. So the cities of ancient history are boiled eggs with a very strong center, and then a series of walls that would protect the center. And instead, the cities in more modern times are like fried eggs. There's still a center, and then you have a periphery that is like not so perfectly neat in borders. And then the cities of today are scrambled eggs, just a mess. And they sprawl in all directions without really knowing where they're going. So that is the metaphor that he was using. And these metaphors are used a lot also by artists. This is a work by Federico Manuel Peralta Ramos that was sent to us by our colleague Ines Katzenstein. This is an Argentine artist that made this egg, showed it for a few minutes, and then destroyed it. Either he destroyed it, or it kind of like broke down. There's a lot of legends, but it's all very, very tragic. And after showing this egg and getting an amazing award in Buenos Aires for it, he abandoned painting and sculpture because it was too broken by the breaking of this egg. So, I mean, I don't know exactly. There's also legends for Filippo Brunelleschi in the cupola of the Cathedral of Florence, but the eggs is the subject of one too many legends. And of course, the Fabergé eggs have been the subject of fascination for many, many centuries. The idea of these super precious eggs, there were 50 that were created for the Russian imperial family from 1885 to 1916. And the first of them was very simple looking, like pretty much it's the one on the bottom right, so absolutely simple looking. But then within, it had a solid gold yolk that then opened and revealed a multicolored gold hen with ruby eyes, which then opened to a golden diamond replica of the imperial crown, which itself contained a tiny ruby pendant suspended on a chain. Not to think about it, but of course, that's what gave the Easter eggs the idea of the surprise within their name. And indeed, Easter eggs are also a feature of many video games. And actually, the first person that gave the idea, the name to Easter eggs was Steve Wright, that was the director of software development by Atari in 1979. And you know, Easter eggs is what you find if you're an avid player, avid gamer, and you get to the very end of the game and you win. There's something, a surprise that is revealed only to the best of all gamers. So eggs everywhere, eggs in all kinds of situations, in all kinds of guises. And of course, you know, for somebody who's not from the United States coming here and hearing about green eggs was very, very funny. So I had to learn what it was, and Dr. Seuss, and of course, the goose that laid the golden egg, and Humpty Dumpty. So there's this repetition of the theme of eggs throughout literature. And also throughout cooking, of course. Tonight we will have a really great chef that will tell us all about it, but eggs in the cuisine can bind, can thicken, can coat, can serve as a leavening agent, can emulsify. So they really are recurrent, and it's hard to think of a life without eggs. And for those who are vegan, soon there will be eggs that are not made using animals that will enable one to live the same way. Eggs can also, as a food staple, help us understand poverty, help us understand how the world works. Because eggs are very often the scaffold of social and economic life. I mean, I don't know if you know about the Bill Gates theory that talks about giving chickens and eggs in order to alleviate poverty in different parts of the world. And it really is interesting to see how eggs exist in pretty much every culture as a food staple. And therefore, in this work by Chow and Lin, we'll hear from them later on in one of the videos, they are a way to compare levels of absolute poverty in different parts of the world. They are a unit of life, a unit of measurement of economic life and of well-being for many different cultures. And of course, because they're so important, they also are the subject of industrial complexes and injustices where left unbridled. And we see here what happens in many of the industrial complexes of production of poultry and eggs. And there are about 100 billion chicken eggs that are produced each year in the United States. So you can imagine what that means in terms of production. And everything comes from an egg. That's what the lore goes. So egg as the beginning of everything. What you see here is William Harvey, that in the early 17th century wrote that everything comes from an egg. So he's the one that advanced the theory of epigenesis, that an embryo develops progressively from the egg cell. Because before then, the theories were really, you might have read some of the readings for tonight, the theories were all over the place. So Aristotle thought that instead of eggs, it was semen mixed with menstrual blood that formed embryos. So there were all these different ideas before William Harvey wrote this particular book. And it's really fascinating also, if you look at the history of how eggs and how fertilization is narrated through history, it's also fascinating to see how many scientists are influenced by the culture of the time in the way they narrate phenomena. Like, for instance, until relatively recently, the idea was that eggs would be sitting like a Buddha, and instead embryos would be the one bravely and valiantly fighting to make life happen. And instead, we know now that eggs are much more active than thought before. So it really is interesting to understand also the connection between eggs and femininity and how it's described in history, in the history of science, and also in the present. We know how charged this topic is today, and many artists throughout history have been thinking about it. Sarah Lucas has often used food as a way to talk about female bodies, and especially to talk about genitals. And instead, Vicky Hodgetts, here, eggs to breasts, also makes that connection. And it's really about femininity and reproductive and freedom, that it's about that eggs enable us to discuss very often. And today, we're still there. We're still debating where life begins. We're still debating what is the beginning of it all and whether a fertilized egg is already life or not. It's really interesting how it is something that we've been discussing for centuries, and it has not been resolved yet. So very fraught topic even today. And these issues become more and more complicated as reproductive science develops and evolves. You know, we have heard about gametogenesis, which will be the way to create eggs outside of the body and will enable also beings that cannot carry eggs to also have fertilized eggs and become pregnant. So it's a real revolution that will change everything that we think and that we know about sexual identity, about the ability to be reproductive, and about how we reproduce. So it is really something that will change it all. But in the end, nothing changes and everything remains the same. And we see here that a dinosaur is in the same shape as a bird and as a baby within the egg. Eggs are still the beginning and the end of it all. And that's what we will discuss tonight with these great speakers. So they're here in alphabetical order, not in order of appearance. We have Roger Benson, who's the Macaulay curator and curator in charge of fossil amphibians, reptiles, and birds, and fossil plants in the Division of Paleontology at the Natural History Museum in New York City. He's recently come to New York, so we're very happy to have him here. It's just about a year. And then we have Laurie Gruen, the William Griffin Professor of Philosophy and Professor of Feminist, Gender, and Sexuality Studies and Science in Society at Wesleyan University, where she coordinates Wesleyan animal studies. And she connects beautiful humans with animals. So I can't wait to listen to her. Then we have Camille Henrot, who is a French artist that lives and works between Berlin and New York. As always, I'm not able to describe artists' work. I let them speak. I always feel so completely inadequate, but her work is wondrous because it really opens up whole universes. And also, it has a pace that is very instinctual for me, so I really relate to her work deeply. And last but not least, we have Kamari Mick, who's the executive pastry chef at the Muscat Room and partner and executive pastry chef at Raff's. They are both in Nolita, and also she was just named Forbes 30 under 30, so congratulations with that, Kamari. That's really cool. Congratulations. And they will speak tonight, interspersed as usual, with videos from friends all over the world. And we'll actually start with two videos. We'll start with a video by Amanda Clark, who's professor of molecular, cell, and developmental biology at UCLA, and then Mary Caswell-Stoddard, associate professor of ecology and evolutionary biology at Princeton University. So let's please start with, oh, I didn't show their faces. Yeah, these are our video contributors. We're going to start with Amanda Clark and Mary Caswell-Stoddard. Thank you.
The egg is a symbol of fertility and the promise of new life. It signals future motherhood, fatherhood, and the potential to create or build a family. However, not everyone with ovaries can make an egg to start their family. Sometimes eggs are made, but they don't function as they should. In some couples, both people make an egg. Whose egg will be used to start their family? In other couples, neither person makes an egg, so a donor egg must be found. Are donor eggs available in different varieties? No, most donor eggs come in one or two varieties, making it difficult for some to build the family that is hoped for. What if scientists could make new eggs? This technology is called in vitro gametogenesis, a scientific method that involves creating eggs outside of the body from a person's skin or blood cells. Scientists are working on in vitro gametogenesis under strict regulatory frameworks as a tool to understand ovarian disease and dysfunction, as well as puberty, fertility, and ovarian aging. In vitro gametogenesis could potentially be used to make an egg from a person who does not make them. This has not been achieved with human cells yet, only animal cells. More basic science research is needed to achieve eggs in this way for humanity and potentially human reproduction. In the future, and if proven safe, some believe in vitro gametogenesis could be an alternate approach to generating an egg for assisted reproduction to start or build a family. There are already many ways to build a family. Should society add one more? For egg retrieval today, women undergo hormone injections and repeated visits to the doctor's office to retrieve enough eggs from the body to build a family. Using in vitro gametogenesis, this will not be necessary as the eggs are made outside the body. Bioethicists argue whether in vitro gametogenesis for human reproduction is ethical, as it will change the way humans reproduce. Given the benefit to millions of women of reproductive age who suffer from infertility, is it ethical to deny in vitro gametogenesis as an alternate choice to make an egg?
Thank you. Hello. In my research group, we investigate the behavior and biology of birds. Bird eggs are one of my favorite topics because they are an exquisite example of evolution and engineering. From an evolutionary perspective, eggs are remarkable because they come in such a great variety of sizes and shapes and colors and patterns. Yet they all have the same function, and that is to protect and nourish the chick up until the moment that it hatches. Each bird, whether we're talking about a giant ostrich or a tiny hummingbird, has evolved an egg that is extremely well suited to that species' environment and life history traits. For example, ground nesting birds like plovers have evolved outstanding egg camouflage, so their speckled eggs are really well matched to the background, which is usually a sandy beach. Bird eggs are also the outcome of a very long evolutionary process. The ancestors of reptiles and mammals evolved these specialized eggs over 300 million years ago. And these eggs were a very important innovation that helped vertebrates reproduce and diversify on land. Now, from an engineering perspective, a bird's eggshell is an extremely impressive material. It is one of the fastest forming biominerals in nature. So we can think about a chicken egg. This egg forms in just under 24 hours, and a second egg can form fully the next day. Eggshell is tough enough to resist fracture, but it's also weak enough to allow a chick to hatch. So how is it that the eggshell evolved both to be very tough, but ultimately breakable? Well, this is a question that my colleagues and I are asking now, and we're using tools from mechanical engineering as well as from evolutionary biology. Bird eggs can also tell us a lot about the health of our planet. They can provide clues about pesticide use and climate change. Overall, by understanding birds in their most vulnerable life stage, as eggs, we will be better equipped to preserve and protect birds and their habitats in the future.
What a delight. It'll come. Okay. Oh, chickens and eggs. We all know, and we just heard, that chickens lay eggs, and there are a whole bunch of other creatures that also lay eggs, and we'll hear more about some of these creatures. Certainly birds lay eggs, fish, seahorse lay eggs, as do many animals with legs. They lay eggs, like crocodiles and platypuses and frogs and turtles. You may not hear it like this, but we too lay eggs. Unlike many of the oviparous creatures that lay eggs and hatch them outside of their bodies, we lay eggs inside our bodies. And here's something that I found really interesting when I was teaching with a developmental biologist, a wonderful colleague. We taught a reproduction in the 21st century course for many, many years at Wesleyan. And I had not known this, and maybe you don't know this either, so I will share it with you. We have all the eggs that we are going to have in our bodies at birth. A typical ovary contains 1 to 2 million oocytes. That's an amazing number when we're born. And at puberty, only about 300,000 eggs remain, and that number declines until menopause. The eggs that humans make are much closer in size to the eggs that frogs make than the beautiful chicken egg. And certainly the chicken egg is about 10 or 12 times smaller than the ostrich egg that we were talking about earlier. And even though our eggs are much smaller than chicken eggs, they're one of the largest cells in human bodies. This is the first picture of a human laying an egg, as it were, releasing the oocyte from the follicle in the ovary, and the egg begins its journey through the fallopian tube into the uterus and beyond. There are other similarities that I want to highlight between humans and their eggs and the eggs that are laid outside the body, like chicken eggs. Chicken eggs are graded, and I'm in the midst of grading at the moment, so I was thinking, maybe I can get into chicken egg grading. It's actually, even in chicken eggs, there's grade inflation, believe it or not. You could get an AA rating as opposed to just an A. There's also A's and B's, no C's, that's also the inflation. But there's the AA and A grade eggs are well-formed with firm yolks, thick albumin, and strong, smooth shells. Oocytes, our eggs, are also graded, sometimes as a 1, that's a good number, a 0, or a -1. And then these scores tend to be totaled across different domains. And why is it that these eggs, these oocytes, are being graded? Well, it's in part, as we just heard, a function of a kind of reproductive technology, and I'll say a little bit more about that. But I did want to just highlight how these eggs are graded. They're graded for their morphology or their shape. They're graded for their size. They're also graded for their ooplasm or cytoplasm, which is how it looks inside the egg, whether you can see here, this is not nice, there's too much granularity. This looks much nicer for the inside of the egg. They're also graded for the quality of the zona pellucida. The zona pellucida we can understand as the eggshell, in a way, the human version of an eggshell. They're also graded for the structure of their paravitelline space, that's the space between the zona pellucida and the cell itself, and the polar bodies, and the morphology of the polar bodies. And the polar body is a cell that develops during the process of egg maturation. Now, the reason, as I was alluding to earlier, the reason that these oocytes are graded is not because they will be eaten, of course, but rather as part of their use in art. Well, not MoMA art, but artificial reproductive technology art. In the United States, in 2021, 1 in 373 births were due to egg donation. And the US is not alone in collecting and exchanging oocytes, human eggs. More than 70,000 donor-conceived children have been born in the UK in the last 20 years. And in 2017, there were over 28,000 donor egg cycles reported in Europe. And these trends are increasing. The use of donor eggs to conceive is also occurring in great numbers in China, New Zealand, Australia, and elsewhere. They're called donations But in fact, these eggs, again, like chicken eggs, are arguably commodified. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine estimates that women undergoing the process will spend 56 hours in medical settings per cycle, assuming there are no complications from any of the procedures. If there's any complications from these procedures, then they are going to end up in medical settings for a longer period of time. During the process, women are often asked to change their behavior in a range of ways. So they're supposed to avoid medications, to refrain from smoking and drinking, to limit their consumption of caffeine, which for me would be really hard, and to avoid changes in diet, to avoid hot tubs and saunas, and also to engage in normal exercise. They're also, not surprisingly, asked to abstain from intercourse for a number of days after retrieval to avoid unintended pregnancies. But women are paid for this work. That's why it's odd to think of them as donors. They're sometimes paid quite a lot, and they're likely to make more money when they're educated, when they're attractive, and when they're young. So this is, I think, a really interesting set of political concerns. There's been growing discussion, as we heard earlier, about the ethical issues raised by this whole process of having women donate eggs. And there's also important ethical concerns raised by the process of paying for these eggs. Two concerns dominate the discussion, and I'm just going to raise them in closing in the hopes that they provide us with some food for thought. The first has to do with the potential for coercion and exploitation of people without other avenues to make good money. Now, in response to this, various sorts of legislation in this country are being enacted, and egg donors themselves have organized amongst themselves to discuss their concerns. And one of their big concerns at the moment is how to think about anonymous, so-called anonymous donation in the age of 23andMe and Ancestry.com and such. The second has to do with the propriety of commodifying body parts or reproductive labor at all. And there's a lot we could say about this. There's a lot that I have said about this in writing. But for now, let's just raise this question. Insofar as human eggs and chicken eggs are really not that different, maybe we should reconsider the ethics of commodifying any eggs and making eggs more available. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Now we have two videos, one by Tim Birkhead, who's the Emeritus Professor of Behavior and Evolution at the University of Sheffield in England, and then Teman Evans, who's the Global Chief of Design at General Mills.
Most people think of the hen's egg as being typically egg-shaped, but in fact birds' eggs occur in a wide variety of shapes. And the most extreme of those is the egg of the common murre, which is very pointed at one end. People have come up with different explanations for why eggs are that shape, and the first one was that this would allow the egg to spin like a top. Murres nest on bare rock ledges, and where the risk of falling is considerable, so this seemed like a sensible explanation. It's wrong though, because you can make an egg of any shape spin like a top, so we can discount that. The second explanation was that this shape will allow the egg to roll in an arc, and certainly on a large, flat, smooth surface, an egg of that shape will roll in an arc. The problem with that is that the arc that they describe is bigger than the ledges on which many murres breed, so I think we can discount that as well. The explanation that we came up with was that this shape is inherently more stable on a ledge, particularly on a sloping ledge, where that long flat surface allows the egg to remain in position. And this gives the breeding birds much more control over that egg. We did a number of experiments that tested that hypothesis, and it certainly seems to be the case. And that, in turn, allows murres to breed at very high density on very uneven surfaces, so they can pack closely together to protect themselves from the predatory gulls and ravens which want to steal their eggs and chicks. So I think the explanation for the shape of the mer's egg is stability.
If I were to rate the egg as a paragon of packaging, I would have to give it a 10 out of 10. And I think there's several reasons for that. Let's just sort of take that for a walk. Just as a container for food, the egg, despite being this opaque packaging, allows one to easily tell if its contents are expired, if they're past their consumption date or not. All you have to do is place that egg in a bowl of room temperature water. If the egg stays at the bottom of that bowl of water, then it's fresh. If it floats to the top of that water, then it's very old. It's past its expiration date, it's spoiled. Most packaging can't do that. You either got to smell it or you've got to taste it or interrogate it visually in some way to be able to make that determination. But then beyond that, as a container, what's so fascinating about the egg is that it has little geometric bias. It has no sides, no top, no bottom. And so what's great about that, what's perfect about that is that lack of geometric bias allows the egg to be a pure communicator in all of its orientations, and which is perfect for the physical shelf and the digital shelf. And beyond just that whole egg, even if you look at the egg in other physical states, be it cracked or scrambled or fried, it can still be that pure communicator. So as packaging, I think of try to imagine other packaging that can do that. It would be fantastic if more packaging operated in that mode where it could communicate purely what it is in all orientations, top, bottom, left, right. That would be incredible. But then I think finally, just if you look at the eggshell itself as a container, it is beautiful because it's reusable. It has so many uses. Though that eggshell can be turned into bird feed or chicken feed, can be turned into chalk. But then it can also be composted because it's biodegradable. It makes great compost. So the eggshell is this discrete packet of sustainable execution, and I think for those three reasons, and honestly many more, uh, I would have to rate that egg as a 10 out of 10 as a paragon of packaging. We have so much to learn from the egg as packaging, and it truly is a glorious creation.
Our next cereal box will be packaged like that. I would like now to call Roger Benson.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. So I'm a paleontologist, and we'll talk a little about dinosaur eggs, but I'm also a vertebrate evolutionary biologist. So I wanted to tell you a little about evolution of the egg. And evolution of the egg is something that's central to answering one of the most long-standing paradoxes related to eggs, which came first, the chicken or the egg? So, whoops. Okay. So eggs are so important that our naming of vertebrate animals, we're all vertebrate animals, is partly centered around the types of eggs that they produce. So in this slide, I just put the land vertebrates, just vertebrates that live on land. And these are the amphibians. This is a frog and some salamanders. And all other land vertebrates that are not amphibians belong to a group called the amniotes. And the amniotes are named from their eggs. These are a selection of amniote eggs that include, this is an ostrich egg. This is the biggest egg laid by vertebrates, elephant bird egg. That belongs to a giant extinct bird from Madagascar. And this is a dinosaur egg. The eggs of amniotes can be laid on land. They can survive in air, whereas the eggs of all other vertebrates and many other animals need to be laid in the water. They just can't survive and develop outside of the water. So the amniote egg is thought to be one of the things that allowed us to live on land in the first place. In evolution, we understand evolutionary relationships, and they tell us something about our history and ancestry. This branching diagram is an evolutionary tree that simply tells us about common ancestors that are shared by different groups. So our birds share a common ancestor with crocodilians that lived after its ancestor with, say, this is a mammal that lays eggs in echidna. That's our group. So crocodilians are the closest living relatives of birds. Dinosaurs are the closest extinct relatives of birds. So dinosaurs tell us about the origins of birds. The ancestor of all amniotes lived 310 million years ago. We know that from differences in their DNA sequences. So the amniote egg has been around for more than 300 million years. And this is a diagram looking inside one of these eggs of amniotes, telling us that it's a detailed, complex structure that houses the embryo and allows it to develop in air on land. It's more than just a shell containing the developing animal. So, three important structures here. The amnion, the amniote egg takes its name. Our group takes its name from this membrane that surrounds the embryo, providing it with hydrostatic support and acting as a receptacle for some of the waste produced by the developing embryo. The chorion is a membrane that surrounds the inside of the eggshell and is filled with blood vessels. You have to think of these membranes as being functionally part of the embryo itself rather than different structures. So they're part of the organism. They share an intimate connection with the developing embryo, including its blood supply. The chorion is there around the margins of the shell to exchange gases, so to take up oxygen and to excrete waste carbon dioxide in exchange with the air. And the allantois, this membrane, that's primarily there for two reasons. One is to collect waste excreted by the embryo, and the other is, as it accumulates waste, it grows in size and then takes on itself an important role in gas exchange. So these are structures without which eggs couldn't develop on land. And we don't lay eggs. The only egg-laying mammals are the echidna and platypus, the monotremes. And this is looking inside the egg. You can see these highly vascularized, so rich in blood vessels, embryonic membranes I've been discussing. Those membranes are shared by our eggs and by the eggs of all other mammals within our body. So this is a rabbit egg. You can see the similarity. This is a koala egg. If I showed our egg, it would appear largely the same. So those structures inherited from our ancestors with other land vertebrates, other amniotes, living more than 300 million years ago, are what allows, in a human or other mammals like this rabbit and koala, what allows the embryo to exchange nutrition and gases from the maternal blood supply. Okay. These membranes that originally evolved to help support the embryo in air on land are the same membranes that allow our embryos to exchange nutrients and gas with the maternal blood supply via the placenta. So we're all amniotes. We know that amniotes first appeared more than 300 million years ago. We have no fossils of eggs until about 100 million years later. We're missing evidence, the early fossil record of these things, because eggs only make it into the fossil record when eggshells first become hard and mineralized. So living reptiles, some living reptiles, including crocodilians, birds, and it turns out many dinosaurs have mineralized their eggs. They have hard eggs that can be preserved as fossils. Now, there are very many things that we know about the fossil record of eggs, while simultaneously not knowing really quite enough. I just want to show you two really neat examples of reproduction in the fossil record of dinosaurs. And dinosaurs are on the line leading to birds, so they tell us about some of the origins of bird-like egg traits. So this is a nesting dinosaur fossil. It's hard to make sense out of initially. These are fossil bones, the white things, and these slightly darkish green structures, they're the eggs. This is a drawing that helps to unpack it. These are the legs, and we're looking at it as if from worm's eye view, so from beneath. And the legs are surrounded by eggs, and this animal, this is a life reconstruction. This dinosaur is sitting there brooding its eggs. This is a recent discovery of a nesting dinosaur. We actually have surprisingly large numbers of these from late in dinosaur history in Central Asia and China. This tells us that the brooding behaviors, the care of eggs seen in present-day birds, first evolved among dinosaur ancestors. It tells us things about the egg morphology of dinosaurs. These dinosaurs have long eggs. They have large eggs, proportionally large eggs, similar to birds. But they don't have asymmetrical eggs. So they're in some ways similar to birds and in some ways different to them. This is a cast of a skeleton of one of the biggest one of the biggest animals that ever lived on land. So this is a 70-ton herbivorous sauropod dinosaur called Patagotitan, a titanosaur. It's so big that it's impossible to take a good photograph of it. We have the eggs of giant herbivorous dinosaurs, and they're not the biggest eggs of animals that we've found. They're eggs of this animal, or the eggs of its relatives, because we don't have the eggs of this exact species, could be between 10 and 15 centimeters in diameter, and they're spherical. They're perfectly round in this more distant dinosaur relative of birds. So some of the biggest dinosaurs laid relatively small eggs even compared to some other dinosaurs. Astonishingly, this is astonishing to me, and I wanted to show it to you, some of the eggs of titanosaurs contain developing embryos that are fossilized. And they must have been very cute because they were very small. So this animal had to grow from a hatchling that weighed hundreds of grams to an adult that weighed tens of tons. This is an enormous amount of growing for a young animal to do, almost in the absence of parental care. This is a fossil of one with the embryo, and this is a three-dimensional reconstruction from CT scanning, so 3D high-resolution X-ray scanning. And this is a life reconstruction of the embryo of this dinosaur in the egg, with its egg tooth and its sort of strange embryonic skin. I wanted to show you this because I'm astonished, constantly astonished in the work that I do about what we can know and what we can see, also how much there still is to know about the evolution of eggs.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you very much. And now 2 videos, first by Nicola Twilley, who is an author, journalist, and the founder of the podcast. It's also a podcast now. Gastropod. And then by Emmeline Root, who's a historian at Sciences Po in Paris and editor of Eton magazine.
A world without eggs would be bleak. Chicken eggs are much more than a delicious food on their own. Their unique chemical structure has made them an essential ingredient. Between them, the yolk and the white can bind oil and water to create emulsions. They can inflate soufflés and cake, thicken sauces and custards, add richness to dough. They can even be used to clarify beer and stock or add a nice color and glaze to pastry. To understand how essential eggs are, you just have to look at America's sordid history of egg wars, egg riots, and egg bootlegging. Example number 1. When the gold rush first got going in California, San Francisco's population exploded overnight. Its chicken population stayed the same. This was before the invention of the incubator, and it wasn't possible to breed large flocks quickly. Miners had money, they were hungry, and chicken eggs ended up costing between $30 and $100 each in today's money. Enter the guillemot, a dapper black and white seabird whose egg has a bright red yolk and a white that stays translucent when cooked, but otherwise makes a pretty decent substitute for a chicken egg. San Francisco was blessed with lots of guillemots. Just 28 miles offshore lay the largest seabird rookery in the contiguous United States. The Farallon Islands are also surrounded by great white sharks and turbulent seas, and they're all cliff face with no safe place to land. But poachers flocked to the islands, stripping them of eggs that they sold for thousands of dollars back in town. The trade was so valuable that boats transporting eggs were hijacked, triggering an egg war between rival egging companies. The guillemot population dropped from an estimated 400,000 down to 6,000 and is still in recovery today. All of which is to say, egg shortages are no joke.
So first of all, arguably the egg has always been culinary dominant. In the thousands of years of history between the human and the chicken, humans have always kept chickens, for the most part, for the eggs, and for cockfighting, meat has by and large been secondary. But when the egg was transformed into a commercial product, this happened at the end of the 19th century in a place called Petaluma, California. There in the 1870s, a man named Lyman Weiss invented the world's first reliable artificial incubator. Before this time, there was no widespread chicken industry for various reasons, and one of them was the fact that it just took quite a long time for chickens to reproduce, and as a result, it was hard to acquire large numbers of chickens. The way we speed this up today is we take away the egg from the brooding hen and put it in an artificial incubator to hatch while the brooding hen continues to lay more eggs for consumption. But prior to the 1870s, we just hadn't figured out how to do this. Ancient Egyptians and some people in ancient China had moderate success with artificial incubators, but Europeans did not, and most of history is littered with just really bad incubator designs. They tried things like wood stoves, alcoholic fermentation, steam engines, but all of these failed because it's very hard to maintain the constant 100-degree Fahrenheit temperature of a brooding hen for the 3 to 4 weeks it takes to hatch a chick. Too cold, the eggs do not develop. Too hot, you've basically just spent 3 weeks hard boiling large numbers of eggs. But Lyman Weiss fixed this problem. He attached a coal lamp to a mechanical regulator. He attached this mechanism to a beautiful wooden box that could fit up to 650 eggs. And this caused an immediate sensation. He took it around the country at agriculture fairs. Everyone wanted an artificial incubator. And from there, you see the emergence of a commercial egg industry because, for once, they could actually mass produce chickens and laying eggs. And so arguably that is the start and the reason why eggs are basically ubiquitous in stores worldwide because of the invention of the artificial incubator. Thank you.
And now, of course, we want Kamari Mick to tell us more about it. Yeah, she got her posse here.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. I want to start off by talking about I want to start off by thanking Paula and thanking MoMA for having me today. Never did I think I would be here. I wish I paid more attention in public speaking class, so as we go. I want to start off by talking about something that we think has nothing to do with eggs. This is a toque. While these aren't worn as much anymore, they used to be an indicator of a fine dining chef. Its height tells you the status of the wearer, and the tallest is reserved for the chef de cuisine. Its pleats tell you how many techniques or recipes that a chef has achieved. In turn, 100 pleats for 100 ways you can cook an egg. Mind you, this 100 ways to cook an egg from Auguste Escoffier, famous French chef who developed the brigade system in 1899. So we are much the wiser that there are more than an infinite amount of ways to cook an egg. Unfortunately, with the time constraint, I won't be able to bore you with 1,000 ways to cook an egg, so we're going to touch on just a few of my favorite applications that use separate parts of the egg. But before we get into that, we should get a little bit more background on the makeup of the egg itself. The white or the albumin accounts for nearly 2/3 of the chicken egg's shelled weight. 90% of that is water, and the rest are proteins and traces of fatty material, vitamins, and glucose. The yolk is the remaining 1/3, and the yolk's biological purpose is almost exclusively nutritive. Its color comes from what the farmer feeds the hen, a lot of them opting for a beta-carotene-rich diet consisting of carrots and capsaicin. The yolk is essentially a bag of water that contains free-floating proteins, protein, fat, cholesterol, lecithin aggregates, and these lipoprotein aggregates are what give the yolk its amazing ability for emulsifying and enriching. When we apply heat, it solidifies an egg, and yes, I did draw this in my little notes app. So when we apply heat, it solidifies the egg. So these are the amino acids prior to applying heat to the egg. As we cook, they begin to unravel and bond to one another, creating a very tight network of meshwork. Sorry, I lost my place now. I got too into it. um, While the list of cooking the whole egg is endless, as a pastry chef, we love to make things a little bit more complicated, as you see. So this is what happens when you whip air into a white. All these air bubbles you see here start to agitate, and all these amino acids stack on top of one another and create a nice foam, nice peaky foam. And as you continue to whip and continue to strengthen these amino acids, they continue to stretch and stretch until they break. Once separated, the yolk has its own superpower as thickening and emulsifying. It's imperative to many classic applications. When you dilute the egg, or the yolk rather, with milk, cream, sugar, salt, probably just a little bit of vanilla for a little spice, then cook that mixture over medium heat while whisking constantly until you reach about 83 degrees Celsius. Yes, I'm giving you a recipe. You'll not only end up with a lovely creme anglaise, but a different, wider, more delicate network that is thick and ready to be used as a base for many applications like ice cream, creme anglaise, custards, pastry creams, creme brulee, flan, cremeux, pan perdue, mousses, etc., etc., etc. And if you replace that milk and cream with fruit juices like lemon or lime, you will get curds. No matter what the application you use in your eggs, it's a dietary importance and seen throughout the world. In France and in America, we have lemon meringue pie or lemon meringue tart. Simply whipping the whites to a stiff peak with 2 times the weight in sugar allows you to achieve a glossy exterior seen here. And beneath that is the lemon curd, once again, using the yolks to form a set custard. From New Zealand, yes, these are all mine. From New Zealand or Australia, you'll have the pavlova. Named after the Russian ballerina, pavlova is a par-cooked meringue that is filled with pastry cream and fresh fruit. Now we'll have mostly used to fill and decorate cakes. Its base is almost eggs, no matter which style you're making. This is buttercream. You can make Swiss, Italian, French, Korean, Russian, German, and of course, the only buttercream that does not use eggs is American. It's a little bit close, but this is a cheesecake. Originating in ancient Greece, it has been well-traveled and transformed throughout the years. The cheesecake has become a worldly dessert seen in the Basque region of Spain with a deep, rich golden skin on the top. In Japan, the whites are whipped and folded into the final batter, allowing it to become more airy and less dense than an OG cheesecake, and it eats more like a sponge. In Italy, the cream cheese is swapped out for ricotta, allowing the flavor and texture to be much lighter. The classic New York cheesecake, it is most favorite. It's creamy, smooth, and always accompanied by a graham cracker crust. And I say all of this not to make you hungry, but to show you the various uses we get out of eggs and the somewhat poetic in seeing how eggs brings us together, just like the chemical process of cooking an egg when individual proteins unravel and reach out to another. We can equate that to food, just like an egg, it can bring us together.
Thank you. That was lovely. Thank you, Kamari. And thank you, Kamari, again. That's great. Now we're going to have 2 videos. The first by, thank you. The first by Chow and Lin, 2 artists that are from Singapore but based in Beijing. And then the second by Ashante Rees, who's an associate professor of African and African diaspora studies at the University of Texas in Austin.
Hello, we are Chow and Lin, an artist duo from Singapore based in Beijing. Our work looks at global phenomenon using statistical research and visual method.
Eggs are an essential food. In the 36 countries and territories that we have traveled to over the past 10 years for the Poverty Line Project, we found eggs to be widely available in the local markets. Eggs are considered a complete food, and one of the most affordable animal proteins. Studies in rural villages in China, Indonesia, and Ecuador have shown that supplementing diets of children with eggs improves growth and nutrition. Eggs can be sold individually or in cartons, and we have found them in ambient storage in hot and humid street environments, while looking equally at ease in air-conditioned supermarket aisles. Their versatility of storage compared to fresh meats and livestock is unmatched. In Ethiopian local markets, the minimum amount of chicken sold is a whole live chicken. The price is out of reach for anyone living near the poverty line of the country.
Egg prices have seen spikes in the past 1 year in many countries, including the US, France, South Africa, and Malaysia, affected by rising feed prices, shortage of supply due to the Ukraine war, and the avian flu outbreak. This has wide impact, especially for vulnerable low-income groups. With egg price hikes, businesses and households have to adjust their recipes and food selections. Eggs are an important indicator, a segue into exploring local cultures, food security, and societal balance. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ashante Reese. I'm Associate Professor of African and African Diaspora Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. And I love this question of what a just food system could look like. Part of the reason I love it is because we don't live in a world and in a society where the food system has ever been just. And so to ask this question means that we have to reimagine our relationship to things like commodity items and staples. Eggs is one of them, obviously, but also salt and sugar, rice, these things that are bound up in the transatlantic slave trade and other forms of dehumanization. So to ask what does a just food system look like, we have to suspend disbelief and to reimagine everything about society. Ruth Wilson Gilmore says that we have to change everything. And while that sounds daunting, that sounds really exciting to me. So a just food system looks like people having access to the things that they help grow and produce and not being alienated from them like so many people who work in our food system are. It looks like being able to delight in the foods that bring you joy and that make you feel connected to your culture, to your ancestors, to your family. It means treating high quality food as something that everyone deserves, no matter where they're born, how much money they have, no matter their race or ethnicity, any of those things, that by virtue of being human, you have a right to high quality foods that meet not only your biological dietary needs, but also your social and your cultural needs. And I think to build a just food system, we really have to be invested in building a more just world. We have to make amends. We have to repair broken relationships. We have to challenge systems that do not prioritize well-being. And we have to treat food as just a symptom, or our food system as just a symptom of other systems that are not broken or that are not working well, I guess I should say. So if you ask me what it means to build a just food system, it means treating everybody like they deserve to be treated well, like they deserve to be nourished, and putting nourishment at the center of our food and our lives rather than secondary.
And now, Dulcis in fundo, Camille Enro.
So I was very nervous to be the last one to speak because at the same time it's very short and there's so much to say, and at the same time I was worried that everything I want to say will be already said. But I guess the egg is really, for sure, a very rich topic. A lot of praise have been said to the egg. I want to manage egg sensibility that I will say some criticism of what's projected on the egg. For me, when I started to delve a little bit into what the egg means and what it represents, It coincided with a research I did at the Smithsonian Research Fellowship, where I received a grant on the basis of a project which was the history of the universe. And I wanted to research the different technique and methods and objects that man had been collecting or using in order to tell the history of the universe, meaning a history that he is only a very small part of. So basically, it quickly became about how to imagine totality and how to imagine the global and things that are beyond our reach. The egg became very quickly an image that came to mind. First, because it represents the beginnings, as it's been said before. Not only represent the beginnings, but it also represents the good, the idea of the good. And then also because it is also a big question mark. When you look at the egg from a conceptual point of view, I think the first thing that comes to mind is who came first, the egg or the chicken? Was there before? How does it start? What is it at the beginning? And very quickly, this is the question I've asked to many people when I did the research at the Smithsonian. It became a cosmological and spiritual question. Even in the scientific museum, very quickly the conversation is being brought at, okay, is it egg all the way down or turtle all the way down? But what is it at the very beginning? So the egg became the image of the beginning, and it was the image of the beginning in many different cultures, from Polynesia to India, China and Greece, the golden egg in India, the egg of Ra, Bangu's egg in China, the egg of chaos in Japan, and the Orphic egg in Greece. All these images were a source of inspiration for the research of the film. But mostly what I was interested in is what people would project into those different mythological stories and how they became later sort of like the ancestor of different creation stories and different narratives. Especially in the film, this is a still of the film Gross Fatigue, which is in the collection of MoMA, which is the film born out of this research on the history of the universe. The egg was an image I used at several moments. Specifically, I used it at the moment where I'm talking about the world, because it felt to me that the image of an egg being peeled was also an image that would match the representation of the world, as it's also broken with like different pieces on the continent. The other reason why I was interested in the egg is because the egg itself is a sort of like super container. It is, there's a French expression which says as full as an egg. So the egg is an image of fullness, of an abundance, so to say. And for the museum, abundance is being. The museum doesn't exist without the idea of being. It's also a quote by Sloterdijk, which was one of the inspiration between considering globalization systems and the egg, and what we can also learn from the fascination for the egg. The egg is also a container of other things, and it's contained many different layers, as we saw before. And it therefore became also, like the onion, an image of the digital world, an image of the computer, because the egg is possibilities, the same way money is possibility. It doesn't have value per se. The same way the egg doesn't have value per se. It has a value if it's generating something other than itself. So this is another still of Gross Fatigue, which shows that, like the egg, the image of the Russian doll is an image that you continue to find also in the digital world. I was very interested with the story of the Fabergé egg, for example, because it also has this connotation where egg is also what's precious, like it represents the most precious, or it's hiding the most precious. The same way the museum is interested in value, in collecting and being as full as an egg with precious things. I realized also, looking again at the film and thinking of the other presentation, that actually most of the animals that are in Gross Fatigue are all amniote, all animals that lay eggs. I wanted to also speak a little bit about the dark side of the egg, which is very much how it's been used to represent totality and autonomy. for many different communities, the egg was used as a city planning, as a dwelling, and for many groups we saw before, it was the mythology of how things begin. But how much is the egg a fetish, and why is it a fetish? Why do we fetishize the origin? Why do we fetishize what is at the very beginning? So these are a little bit the question I was asking myself as I was doing the research. Another element that I thought was intriguing is to consider that many eggs are not white. They are brown, they are spotted, they are blue, they are red, but the iconographic image, the ideal image of the egg is always white. So there is something suspicious about what's projected on the egg. I would say even a little bit dangerous, because fetishizing of the origin, fetishizing of purity often led to a sort of dream of autonomy. We project on the egg also that it's self-sufficient, while it's never self-sufficient. It never exists without somebody to care for it or to lay on it, and also it's vulnerable, and it's meant to either be broken and evolve or to be fertilized. I wanted to just maybe finish a little bit on sculptures that I've been making in relationship with those ideas. This is a sculpture called Story of Substitute, which is actually not the mother. It's a character that I imagine as a caregiver, somebody who actually didn't have a child. And the shape of the child is engraved in the arm, and at the place of the belly, it's empty. But I imagine when I came to the moment to make the head, I couldn't do something else other than the egg cracking. I think maybe it was in order to represent the sort of identity crisis connected with raising his children, but later I thought, no, it's not about that because she doesn't have a belly. And what I meant to say is that we all have an imaginary child. I wanted to make an image of that the idea of beginning is something we all have also in ourselves. When we are children, we dream of the children we might have, and that children stay with us forever. It's an imaginary child that will never be born, even if you have 10 children. This imaginary child will never exist. So this is one of the things that this culture represents, the sort of idea of what can be, the egg can be as a sort of pure possibility, but the idea that this possibility exists also in your mind. I wanted to finish with a quote that was part of the book I did about growth fatigue. It's a book called Elephant Child. And it comes from a book about autist child. I saw in the subway somebody reading it, and I first thought he was reading How Do Artists Think? And actually he was autist. And that quote, please make me whole because I am in pieces, is a request addressed from a child to his mother. And that really made me think about why do we need the egg? Why do we need the museum? Why do we need super container? There is this longing that we all have to find again something where everything can be contained and where all the community can fit. And I think this is the expectation that are projected on the egg.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Camille. So now I would like to invite you all to sit with me, please. This was beautiful. Thank you for these great presentations. And I'm going to start, you also prepare your questions. All of these presentations have left something suspended, which is quite beautiful. Like Laurie, at the end, you ended by saying that you would like to argue that all types of eggs should not be commodified, right? That's what you argue. So what did you mean with that? Do you think, can you picture a scenario in which all eggs are like open source, right? The open source, like, so. No, you don't have to do anything. You just start talking and it's going to go on.
Yeah. Okay, great. Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I think it's a difficult question, and it's a question that I'd like to sort of riff on this idea of what is it that we're looking for, and why is it that if there is something remarkable and magical and wonderful, there might not be, but if there is, why are we commodifying it? That was the thought. What do we lose when we put something of such beautiful value onto the market when it becomes exchanged? So that was what I was getting at more than, I mean, it would be a whole different political system to kind of imagine how this would all be available. But what do we lose when we start putting a price on, let's say, a person's eggs? So if you're desperate for a child and you want this child, and the only way you can do that is by using somebody else's egg. In early stories in the Old Testament, people would just do this as a mechanism of love and care and community. But what does it mean to pay people for that labor? That was the question I was trying to. I was trying to raise it as a question as opposed to answer.
It's really fascinating because I connected without being cynical or without disrespect, but I connected with Nicola Twilley's speech about the more eggs and the fact and the egg wars. So the laws of the market make it so that there's a market also for oocytes.
Right. That's exactly it. And that there's a market in oocytes raises really profound questions. There are certain things that we think are market inalienable, things that shouldn't be on the market, things that's very value becomes questionable once it is a part of commodity exchange.
Right.
And that was the value question I was raising.
Right, and the marketability of the egg, of the chicken egg, came from the ability to control it with the incubator. So we're still relatively early into our journey about oocytes, so what can we learn about the marketability or non-marketability of the oocytes from the history of the marketability of chicken eggs?
Oh, it's a really great question. I think there's two really important things I'd like to do in imagining another way forward, which is to think about gametogenesis, which is a really interesting way of thinking about how we might get oocytes without human labor. There's human labor in the laboratory, but human biological reproductive labor. And then there's also, as you mentioned earlier, all of this really wonderful work to create egg-like substances, food stuff, that doesn't come from chickens, right? So I was at a restaurant that Tal Ronan, who's a really remarkable chef, vegan chef, and he created this leek tart that had a yolk on top that spread all over the tart, which was also seeming very eggy, and it was only plant-based. So when you think about this,
I think that the people that do that are here. Yeah, here you are. Actually, yeah, they got in touch. They got in touch with us just last week, and I understand that in 2 days you're going to have this just like wonderful vegan demonstration with your eggs, right?
So the sort of idea is that perhaps there's a way of not having scarcity and having an abundance. And in some ways, that's what eggs are.
Eggs as abundance, that's really great. But we want to hear more about also how you can make eggs without any chickens or animals. So, Roger, now, question for you. What more is there still to be learned about the evolutionary history of eggs? Something every day.
People think scientists know a lot, but one of the jobs of scientists is to know what they don't know. And when you start realizing what you don't know, you realize
so what don't
you know a lot less. So we're missing all of the early, as from the fossil record, we're missing all of the early evolution of amniote eggs. And it's probably because they were soft-shelled eggs, and they, most of the time, never fossilize at all. Even if we had the eggs, we wouldn't have the membranes that surround the embryos as fossils. So we don't know, for example, how evolution takes us from the jelly egg of an amphibian or a fish egg to an amniote egg. We have one or the other today, but there must be things in the middle that have some of the features of the amniote eggs. And they would tell us about how these structures came about in the first place.
So what does one need to fossilize? What do I need to fossilize?
It helps if you have bones and teeth
bones, okay.
and
I have
shells
bones.
and
Calcium.
other hard structures.
Yeah.
Anything that's a mineral. Yeah. So we produce minerals in our body. The human body produces, bone is one of the main minerals we produce, but we produce a lot of other minerals, and those are the parts that fossilize. Dinosaur fossil eggs, almost all of our dinosaur fossil eggs are hard-shelled eggs. And because birds have hard eggs and crocodiles have hard eggs, for a long time people thought all dinosaurs laid eggs and all the dinosaurs must have hard shells. But even just 2 years ago, paleontologists discovered the first soft-shelled dinosaur eggs. And it changes our understanding of these animals from a group where we think everything is reproducing the same way to a group when we should realize, we only have 1,200 dinosaur species of the many more than that must have existed. Of those, we have tens of eggs. Many of our eggs, we don't know which species they belong to. Maybe some dinosaurs had live young and we just don't know. And we may find out one day through discovery, but almost everything, more than 99%. Who knows how many species that ever lived were extinct? And we know a fraction of what we could know about any of them, and it means we know a fraction of what we could know about the evolution of life on Earth. That's it. That's what we don't know.
Quite a bit. Okay, we still ways to go. And talking about what we don't know, Kamari. So Escoffier, 100 types of ways to cook an egg, and we know that there's many, many more. Have you ever thought of new ways to use an egg?
I actually often think of ways to not use an egg.
Aha, interesting. All right.
I'm always looking for, because Musket Room has a vegan menu, we are often looking for ways to not incorporate animal protein into our food. So anytime I actually do an egg-based or meringue-based dish, I try to flip it on its head and do it in a fashion of using chickpea liquid, also known as aquafaba, to make a meringue out of.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And then the dish that you were talking about with the leeks and the faux yolk, we've done stuff like that as well. Even changing the traditional way of techniques, like a il flottant, where it's also known as the floating island.
My favorite.
It's a steamed meringue. So through many, many trials and errors, one dessert I never gave up on, instead of steaming the chickpea liquid, because if you steam it, it just dissolves and disintegrates into a pile of mush. I decided to set it with vegan gelatin, or also known as agar-agar, which is seaweed. So taking these traditional egg cookery ways and trying to make them more available to those who don't want to digest animal product is always interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. It's really fascinating because it looks like the two of you and Camille, are trying to break the slavery of the egg. It's like all this fascination. So, Camille, I wanted to talk more about the substitute. What was the full title of the sculpture?
Story of a Substitute.
The Story of a Substitute, because that was really haunting. I mean, there were so many different layers: the lack of a belly, the imaginary child, the fact that it's an egg but is perched on your shoulder as if it were a bird of sorts. So, what is your relationship with eggs today? And it does, because it's really, you made me think. I always thought that it was so positive, the egg, and I said, no, it's really, there's a dark side to it, as you said.
No, in my daily life, I have a very positive relationship with egg. I eat 2 eggs in the morning.
Every morning?
With a French little coquetier and the mouillette, like the... I don't know how you call that in English. The bread is sliced.
Yeah, the soldiers. They call it the soldiers. With the soldiers.
Oh, that's great. Egg coquette. Okay, yeah. that's I didn't know. And now I know what to order at the restaurant. But but it's more when I was thinking about the globalization systems, like the attempt to totalizing things, that I realized that there's the motivation behind it is often fear of death, but it also brings death on it somehow. And for example, in a way, like the museum in the collection, the activity of collecting is also somehow has been connected with extinction of some species. For example, the dodo was an animal that was very much disappearing. I mean, you know more about that. And actually, the dodo was laying egg as well, and the egg were also taken to museums. The British and the French museum were competing a lot for the dodo, and that's how the dodo disappeared. In the U.S., in the Smithsonian, the coelacanth, the fish, everybody thought it was extinct, and then it was found, and then it was fished, and now it's in the tank at the Smithsonian Museum, Natural History in Washington. And so there is an impulse that is also, the projection of life and the projection of the beginning of life
and the projection of purity has somehow the consequences that are inverted somehow, that it brings death on.
Yeah, it's something that Christina, you had written in the whole preparatory text that was really beautiful, that an egg, when it's perfect and not broken, it's the expression of a potential for life that is not expressed, right? It's almost like death, you know? So the life is revealed through its disappearance, in a way.
Yeah, also I guess the money is a good metaphor for the egg in the sense that it's value, but also it becomes value only if it's transformed or exchanged. And I think you see it a lot with the idea of cooking. I was very intrigued when your stills arrive and all the different eggs, because I think it's really interesting that we imagine the egg always, you know, with the shape that is so specific, but then so many other things rather than this shape. And this shape is also used a lot in religion. Yeah. So there is a lot of like fetishization of the egg, but the egg is meant to be eaten or to become another life which escapes the shell.
The museum as egg will stay with me. I'll think about it a lot with all its different layers. It's pretty great. Laurie, back to you. So one of the biggest concerns that is discussed about the topic of commodification of eggs is also the difference between classes and the accessibility of this whole market and the idea of having designer babies, control. So do you see that as a real possibility of concern in the future also with gametogenesis? How do you think this difference between classes will evolve?
Yeah, that's the sort of one of the, I think, central worries is this concern about exploitation and the forcing of certain people of a certain class to think this is a great and easy way to make some money, right? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that is happening is, at least in the United States, is I don't think this is going far enough, but that you cannot go through more than 6 quote unquote donation cycles. That's where the scientists at the moment think that probably is safe. But again, we don't know what we don't know. And it's really clear that many people who are going through that process of donating eggs are people, often college students, but also people who don't have other forms of income or other forms of work. The people who use these services also have to have some money too. So there's a lot of, I think, really complicated questions to be asking about the justice. I mean, we talked about food justice, which was really an important part, but it's also about reproductive justice and what is going on. I mean, there's a huge area of questions, but this is one of those areas. And with gametogenesis, what's possible, and what I was trying to sort of hint at, is that it may be possible that in laboratories, you can create oocytes that don't require human labor. I mean, other than the laboratory labor. And I think there's some really potential there, because the hope, even though some of us don't share it, but the hope is that for people, who aren't otherwise able to produce eggs, that there's still a possibility of having children. And that's obviously not something that is only one class of people who want to do that. But there is, as we know from surrogacy markets, a real danger of having a whole class of people. A lot of the reproductive labor is going offshore, right? So there's huge markets in India and other places where women are paid very little, although given their options, it's a great opportunity to not have to worry about poverty after. So it's a complicated issue, and it is really complicated.
Yeah. Super. Yeah, I'm going to do one last round of questions, and then I'm going to pass the word to you. So, Roger, this thing that birds have descended from dinosaurs, is it a recent discovery, or is it something that's been known for a really long time?
So do you know, it was first suggested in 1869.
1869, okay.
But when we knew very few fossil dinosaurs, but Thomas Henry Huxley, an early evolutionary biologist, observed that dinosaurs uniquely share some features of the skeleton with birds. And then it was doubted for a long time, really, until the 1970s. And then it was a matter of some scientific debate it really solidified in the 1990s with the discovery of really well-preserved fossil dinosaurs.
It's very recent, yeah.
From China that preserve amazing structures, including their feathers.
So was it like a tectonic shift, like everybody, all paleontologists and...
I think it was a gradual shift over a few decades. But the evidence was striking. Well, the evidence from the fossil bones was there all along. The evidence from fossil feathers and other bird-like features that really are rarely preserved as fossils, but when they were found, were really convincing to a lot of people were sudden. Do you know there are even fossil egg follicles? So the structures that release eggs in some fossil birds.
Wow. That's pretty amazing.
It's surprising, because they produce minerals, so they can become mineralized and fossilized. They're actually quite controversial. Some people think they're seeds. But
oh, really?
But
Seeds, follicles? We go back into the references that come from culture as opposed to science, right?
Yeah.
Follicles and seeds. Another question for Kamari. So are there different cuisines that rely more on eggs? Like, are there cultural differences in reliance on eggs, or do you see them pretty much throughout the world?
You definitely see them throughout the world a lot, but the French love their eggs. I am classically French trained, and there's almost an egg in every traditional recipe, from eating it raw to having it cooked over and over again. The French are definitely like at the top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
2 eggs a day here.
And going to the French, so when you were doing that research at the Smithsonian, were there any particularly memorable encounters with eggs?
Actually, I mean, so when I did the research at the Smithsonian, I was a fellow of the American Indian Museum, so they were supporting my research. But I was very interested by the Natural History Museum, especially the bird section. So I filmed a lot there, but I really wanted to go to the reptilian department, and especially because the crocodile, because I was fascinated by the fact that birds and crocodiles are from the same family, and they are the closest related.
You knew it.
Yes, so but it was impossible for me to get access. The reptilian curator was an absolutely no for welcoming me. I mean, a lot of scientists were very suspicious about me doing a research on the history of the universe. They suspected it would be very shallow, that it would be very distorted, that it would also be a critique of the museum, which it was a little bit. So I was not welcome everywhere. So because I didn't manage to get to see the egg of the egg collection at the Natural History Museum, I actually went to a pet shop in Paris, and that's where I filmed.
You're about to invite her, right?
Reptile.
You're about to invite her. Huh? Yes, Roger.
I'm very suspicious now, sure.
Very suspicious of the shallowness of artists and their need to provoke and to criticize. So. All right, ready for you. Are there any questions? Yes, there's somebody there in the middle. Well, I'm gonna let Christina decide. Because I always take control of who gets the questions, which is not fair.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
I have a very specific question of evolution. So I grew up around the Everglades, and it's one of the few places in the world where crocodiles and alligators coexist. And I learned by living there and having that be my place of nature that the eggs of alligators will change sexes based on the temperature that they're laying in. In this case, I think it's like a 3-degree temperature, so it's like 33 degrees Celsius, I believe, will become male, and then it's 3 degrees colder, it becomes female. And I'm just really curious why that would be, why 3 degrees of temperature would create one or the other. It's pretty specific, so it's okay if.
Well, thanks, because I don't know the answer. But some animals, their sex is determined genetically, and some it's determined by environmental factors. It happens in crocodilians, it's determined by temperature. They have some control over the temperature when they're constructing the nest, they lay eggs. And it's a sort of statistical average. It's not a deterministic process by which all offspring will always have the same sex. I don't know why that evolved in the first place, but it's neat. I would love to be able to say more about it, and I should find some of the answers people have suggested.
And do you think that animals decide that they want to have more females, or I'm going overboard
so
here?
Animals have behavior. Animals that don't even have brains have behavior, and that behavior is determined by the history of natural selection on their ancestors that caused them to be the way that they are. Yeah. And that's a purposeless process that involves, survival of the individuals that produce the most offspring or transmit the most genetic material to the next generation. So this purposeless process produces apparently purposeful decision-making, but I don't think the alligator's necessarily deciding in the way that we would understand.
I want to have a girl. Yeah, no, I understand. Thank you. Next.
Thank you. So my name is Hendrik Jan. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm an artist and a designer. And 5 years ago, I worked on a project called Reprodutopia, which was all about the future of artificial reproductive technologies. And around that time, I met a gynecologist in the Netherlands, Professor Giet Oei, and he said at that time that he was able to create an artificial womb within the next 5 to 10 years. So we're 5 years into that future, and he hasn't realized the project. We did a small mobile exhibition, something like a fictitious fertility clinic where people could engage with speculative projects. Question, yeah. Mm-hmm. So the question would be, to the panel, would you see a technology like that contribute to a more, let's say, more better or just future? That's question one. And question two is, what's the role of designers in that future?
So artificial womb, is that something that is, well, gametogenesis, you know that it's happening? Or?
Well, there's been, there is a lot of work that's been trying to allow children to be, so to go back to the way we were talking about it, to actually mature outside of the body, right? Mm-hmm. And that is something that there's a lot of different motivations for that sort of thing. I have not heard that there's been any progress at all in that. I mean, people have been trying to do that, not just in the Netherlands, but in various other parts of the world, and I have not heard that there's been any real. Have you heard? No.
I saw it on Grey's Anatomy.
On Grey's Anatomy? Grey's Anatomy. It's the Bible.
Womb?
The Bible for me?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I haven't gotten to that episode yet. I'm just going through all 75 seasons, one after the other. And as to the role of designers, we'll talk about that, because I'm trying to, because I'm a design curator, I'm always trying not to go too much into design in the salons, because otherwise I'm going to get accused of being favoritism. But yeah, so we'll talk about it later. So next.
Thank you. This was a very far-ranging, broad discussion. And I apologize, and I know it's about eggs, but I cannot resist raising the question of the chicken. And the commodification, when we come to the subject of eggs as food and the importance of eggs as food, and talk about the commodification of chickens and eggs.
What is the question?
Well, what effect is the farming of chickens affecting eggs?
Interesting. Okay, so quality and go ahead.
Well, one of the things that I think is really fascinating about, and you showed this in a slide earlier, that massive commodification of the egg industry is that eggs themselves and the hens that lay the eggs are nothing like the jungle fowl that they were originally. And so this process has led to the creation of kind of a new creature that makes different eggs than you would see in jungle fowl, which is what chickens
How are they different? The eggs.
Yeah. Can I tag team with you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know about the eggs. Maybe you do. The chickens are much bigger. They grow much faster. They're much less mobile. And we've forced them down this road by choosing which individuals produce offspring through selective breeding over more than a century. But the broiler chicken, the modern day mass-produced chicken, is radically different even to a domestic chicken from 100 years ago.
And there are still these chickens that exist. If I could just be a little bit grotesque, is that okay?
Oh, yeah.
One of the sad features of the current poultry industry is that there's a need for more and more hens, but when you have male chicks in a poultry set, they're just ground up or suffocated. So there's you said millions, there's millions of these things happening all the time, which is a sad feature of that industry.
Absolutely.
I also believe that as we, as a human race, evolve and we find more and more of our peers becoming meatless, but not necessarily vegan, there's still a need for eggs, but not as much as the chicken meat itself. I've worked with a ton of people who are like, oh, eggs are fine. And it's the fact of that they're vegetarian, but not vegan. So all the offspring of, all the product of animals, milk, dairy, eggs, even honey, are still acceptable for, their diet rather than, eating the meat that has been stuffed with GMOs. So a lot of restaurants now are opting to use local farms and to use, to move away from using like Purdue, which, I shouldn't bash anybody, but never know who's going to sponsor me.
No, that ain't happening. That ain't happening.
It's not gonna happen. But it is something that we see a lot now. People moving away from meat, but staying in that lane of animal byproducts.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah.
I'll start with the question part first because it's a massive question in my mind from this evening, which does have to do with the controversies around abortion and when does life start. And the primary thrust of this evening, as far as I can see, has been to consider the egg primarily not as a step towards the autonomous
Not as a
creature.
what? I'm sorry?
Not as a step towards the autonomous creature that will come out of it. There have been some little moments, but by and large, I think you've been concentrating partly because we're about eating eggs, not on the egg as a proto creature, whether it be human or otherwise.
And what is the question?
Well, the question comes into, is there any way that all of you would try to thematize the issues around abortion in relation to the issues you've talked about this evening?
Well, yeah, Laurie.
Right. I think, there's a really important distinction to make between the egg or the oocyte or the cell that is the egg and an embryo. And that wasn't our remit, right, to talk about embryos. But I think that in many cases, there's a question about whether that is the role or the purpose of the egg. But I think we got a really good sort of sense of thinking, no, there's multiple ways of thinking about what this cell is, at least the human cell.
Yeah, and not all eggs are life. So if the topic of the conversation is the egg, it's obvious that it can take many orientations the same way not all seed grows.
Yeah, the purpose of tonight was to use the egg as a door into many, many different discussions, including the reproductive rights one, but not only that one. So, because Christina, my intention was to take an object that would disclose many different discussions. And as usual, it becomes like slightly chaotic, and we leave knowing less than we did before. But there are some sediments that remain. So absolutely, talking about the eggs was a way to also discuss, or at least highlight what's going on in the world and of the discussion. Yeah, distinguishing between the two. Perfect. Yeah. Oh, Bruno, thank you. Word. What's going on? You've gone all around. It's like a game.
Sorry.
That's okay. Where are you going, though?
Sorry,
it's
he was
interesting.
waiting for a bit. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Wow, that was really, thank you. This is just a variation of the theme, but I've been watching some podcasts on embryogenesis.
You've been watching podcasts. I like that.
Well, it actually is, I don't know what you'd call it, a YouTube video.
Okay.
And the question is a slight variation, which is when you start off with 2 cells, a sperm and an egg, you basically have matter. And the question is, when does that convert into mind, or let's call it consciousness? So the question is, do eggs have consciousness?
No. No.
I'm not a
scientist. It's a very controversial topic, but there's an emerging field on this.
Roger,
I don't know when human consciousness starts in the developing human. Biologists have been really keenly interested to understand how we could tell which of our cognitive traits are present in other animals. And these are difficult questions to answer, even sort of in a comparative sense. So we don't know if the alligator has consciousness. We doubt it, I think. But, I mean,
you should know that the Cambridge, there was a Cambridge Declaration on the consciousness of animals, and the idea is that consciousness in the sort that's very, very basic is really much more widespread than the model that we've been using. So the idea going back evolutionarily to organisms that could start to move and go one way or the other was sort of proto-consciousness. And so I would be very surprised if alligators weren't conscious.
you should listen to her.
Thank you. This is fascinating. I'm Louise Hartman. I'm an architect and a collector myself. It's a question for, I think, between Kamari and Roger, which is to say it's about morphology. When you look at an egg, and come back to the Sheffield professor as well, I want to know more about why that particular elongated form, the morphology of that egg in his one experiment, didn't fall off the cliff. Does it have anything to do with the hatching process itself? But can you look at an egg in the fossil record or in the eggs that you cook with, can you see like what looks good? Can you tell anything by looking? It's a question about experience, like long experience.
So yes, for sure. Many, many ways, like Lori had in her demonstration about the egg grade. When the egg sits on a flat surface and is very voluptuous, if you will, it has like a really firm yolk. If you crack it decently hard, it won't break. And as you go through the cartons and cartons of eggs that I've gone through, you can definitely notice that, what's the word? Some yolks can be phosphorescent a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
You could definitely see the difference. Like there's gonna be like this teal green overshadow, but then if you take a black light to it, don't ask me why I have a black light.
Yeah, exactly.
It glows.
It glows.
It glows, and it's really fascinating. And I don't know why it glows, but
Roger, come on.
I threw it out, so I didn't cook with it. I was just like, there's something wrong with this, and I don't want to turn anybody to like Spider-Man. So, and then also, as you go through a bunch of eggs as well, sometimes you'll get twins, too. And sometimes you'll get a bloody egg, which I also don't use, and some are misshapen on the outside of the shell, too.
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask you.
Like it was like a hard push.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I don't know why that happens either, but I've gone through, I think, 100,000 of eggs in my whole career. So why do they glow?
I don't know why they glow. The shell of the egg is put there by the mother, and everything inside the shell that's part of the new animal. And chickens, if you don't give them enough calcium, can lay essentially an egg without a shell. So I think you can get, I don't know the details, I think there are ways you can get an egg that has the wrong shape. I was interested in the shapes of eggs, because some dinosaur eggs are long and thin, and some eggs are basically spherical. I was interested in the idea that if you're an animal that lays a proportionally big egg, you want to put a lot of material in the egg, but you've got to put it out through a small hole, so then the egg has to end up being longer and thinner in order to fit. And it may be why giant dinosaurs that lay small eggs have spherical eggs, whereas smaller dinosaurs that lay bigger eggs have long, thin eggs. And you get long, thin eggs in some of the smallest vertebrates that lay eggs, like some lizards and tiny birds. And that may also be because as the adult gets smaller, the egg gets smaller, but not as quickly, so it proportionally is bigger, and they have to squeeze it through a smaller hole that way. This receives intermediate levels of statistical support for those of you who are interested. So it may be true or not.
Next.
Thanks for a fantastic talk. My name is Alan McFarland from NYU. Eggs as inspiration. In 1875, Booker T. Washington founded Tuskegee Institute, and a woman that was enslaved, 75 years old, wanted to donate to the school. It didn't have any money. So what she did was she brought all that she had, and it was just 6 eggs. And she gave Booker T. Washington 6 eggs because she says, please use these eggs to help establish the school, because that's all that I have. How have eggs inspired you, and can you talk about that?
Is it for Camille? Or?
I'm sorry? For all.
For all? Okay. Mm-hmm. Egg is inspiration.
I think as we are all trying to move, we may not all be trying to move away from meat and meat-based products, I look at the egg as the 100 ways that it is used. So how can we use those 100 ways to not use it? How can we transform? One thing I, as a 29-year-old chef, love to do when I'm creating a dish is how can I flip it on its head? How can I, take the old traditions of frankly old white men and put it into my vision lens as a young Black woman? So taking eggs and being able to recreate dishes by not using them, for sure. Like I do a pavlova that, not to humble brag, but Michelin said it was like the best pavlova they had. It was 100% vegan. The cream was vegan, the granita was vegan, the orange segments that I used were vegan, and most importantly, the meringue was vegan. Once again, using that chickpea liquid to be able to, create dishes that you're like, I didn't know. I would not have ever known if you didn't say anything. So
eggs as a symbol of toxic white masculinity?
Really? You said it, not me. But that's how eggs inspired me.
That segues exactly into the question I have for Lori. What should we be thinking about relative to the consequences of one-child policies? in various continents on the planet Earth?
Well,
So I think if I can guess where that question came from, I mean, so talking about all of this assisted reproductive technology on the backdrop of the climate catastrophe that we're encountering on the planet, it becomes kind of a challenging question. Why should we keep wanting to reproduce when especially in places like Europe and the United States, where we consume far more resources than we're quote unquote entitled to. I don't know if we're entitled to any, but we're extractive beings and we're excessively extractive. So you might be asking, well, why should we be worried about or inspired by reproductive technologies? And I think there's a really rich question there, but there's also an important question that we need to ask about who's deciding who gets to only have one child, and how resources are really maldistributed across the globe and across classes. And so there's a real matter when we're talking, I think what I would answer the question, when we're talking about questions of reproductive justice, we really can't, in this current moment, we can't really think of those absent other forms of justice and injustice. And that's how I would answer that.
True, yeah. Did you want to? Oh.
I just wanted to say that in relationship to that question, there's a very interesting text by Megan Kreis, which is called "Is It Okay to Have a Child?" And she is examining exactly that question. And she's explaining how the invention of the carbon footprint has been actually made by oil companies in order to shift the responsibility from companies to individuals, and how historically every time there's a catastrophe, women are blamed for it. And the responsibility falls onto women. Women have either too much children or too much abortion. So I think this is something also to examine, like when we start asking ourselves those type of questions, is to understand also where it's coming from and why we arrive there in terms of question.
I think I can take one more question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for interesting presentations. I wanted to come back to the issue of symbolism that was you opened with. And there was symbolism of wholeness, new beginnings, and so forth. I wondered if there are cultures that have vastly different symbolism from eggs.
I think it would be you. Yeah, you, the one that studied it the most.
Yes, but I don't
And
remember.
also there was that really interesting slide that you had that looked like it was like a tarot, almost.
Yeah, I guess I think it's, I want to pass the micro to somebody else, but I guess in the story of the egg of chaos, the egg represents also the void, and it represents, the beginning is darkness, it's the void, and the egg represents the opposite of fullness, it represents the void, and that's in Japanese mythology.
Well, with this, the egg turns around
do you
on
want to
its
add
head.
something?
Well, I really, with this, would like to thank you all for coming tonight. I would like to thank these wonderful, wonderful speakers. Yeah, thank you. I would like, as always, to thank Christina Mouchot, and I would like to thank the great AV crew here at MoMA. And now, as you know, just like every single time, we're going to go out and have some so-so wine and mediocre snacks and keep on talking until the wee hours. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Yeah, we do have